Welcome to this video, where I'll be commenting the movie from 2009, Englishman in New York. This video assumes you have seen the movie. The film begins tellingly with English singer Gracie Fields, "If I'm a dreamer, aren't we all?" Perhaps Englishman in New York, Mr. Quentin Crisp, played by the British actor John Hurt, feels he is only dreaming in England, not living the dream. It clearly shows that Crisp loves pluralism in New York. For example, says Crisp, "Without the outcasts the metropolis would be a very dull place." We hear Donna Summer's "Last Dance" interspersed with Crisp walking the streets of Manhattan. I love the experience of Donna Summer's music combined with Quentin Crisp. They complement each other. An agent named Connie Clausen sees Crisp on stage and she hires Crisp. They want to make money from being different and deviant. Crisp also appears on a radio show where listeners can call in and get advice from Crisp. Crisp tells a listener, who calls in and tells of being rejected by a woman, that, if you don't succeed at first, maybe failure is your style. I find that the truth is told without pretensions. A woman calls into the radio program, and says that she has moved to a new neighborhood, and that the woman next to her is much taller than her. She has nicer clothes, a nicer house and a bigger car. Crisp, as often, resorts to one of his rules of thumb: never try to keep up with the Joneses. Drag 'em down to your level. It's cheaper. Crisp seeks immigration in New York. Crisp's argument for immigration becomes uniqueness. "I have been told that the Constitution allows residency for unique people, who can fulfill a function that no one else can realistically fulfill." Crisp becomes a legal alien as Sting sings in the song Englishman in New York. Crisp seems to be on a roll. He smiles. On a show, a woman from the audience asks Crisp, "How do you stay healthy? How do you balance the public you with the private you?" One of Crisp's rules of life is expressed: it is easy. Become your public persona. Eradicate the private one. The woman further asks, "What if your husband or your children don't like your public persona?" Another of Crisp's existential rules of life is expressed: why are you with them if they don't like who you are? Leave them. It's like in Sting's song, "Be yourself no matter what they say." Crisp has some experiences and realizations as the woman additionally asks, "Yeah, okay, but so what? Haven't you ever been in love?" Crisp radiates seriousness, clarity and a harsh reality. He replies, "Never." Crisp says that the essence of a real man is that he does not fall in love with his own sex. A man in the audience who is apparently gay is upset by Crisp's statements. The man doesn't think Crisp is a pioneer anymore. But Crisp replies that it has been many years since he assumed he represented homosexuality. He is nowadays just his own, small and weak self. Crisp seems to have felt very alone. Crisp will not allow himself to be nudged into a new conflict with the human race. It has been a long, tough move, it sounds like, but it has succeeded in the end. Voiceover reads, "Now that we've finally met. I love it." Crisp is seen walking out of the cinema for the first time with Mr. Steele, who is the editor of the magazine, who has recently hired Crisp. After they talk a bit about the movie Tootsie in relation to movies from Crisp's youth, Steele asks if he can follow Crisp home. It seems Steele likes Crisp and cares about him. At the party, Crisp is introduced to a young man. The young man asks if Crisp is some kind of gay hero. I don't think it suits Crisp to be avant-garde. He will not be put in the hero box. The young man eventually walks away from Crisp in annoyance as Crisp is not playing along. Crisp and Mr. Steele sits and talks at the local diner. Mr. Steele has the pangs of love. Crisp responds with something similar to the Christian commandment of love. It reminds of something the Danish author and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard might have written. Crisp says, "If your love is valuable to you, it is because you give it. You must be ready to expect nothing in return. Once you accept this, your heart will never be broken again." There will be a voiceover with Crisp's voice. Here, as often in the film's voiceovers, comes a form of analysis and deeper questions. In the voiceover, he describes the other bar patrons as clones. Also, it sounds like clones are only attracted to other clones. But who is the original, the archetype, asks the voiceover. And which of them are mere pretenders, clone admirers in disguise? When Crisp and Steele get kicked out of the gay bar, Steele is more indifferent where Crisp is more angry. We hear the radio talking about the new AIDS epidemic with over 600 cases. 1 in 3 is dead. I think that it is serious, especially in the gay community. The president's White House spokesman makes fun of AIDS. We hear one of Crisp's realizations and rules of living: beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Crisp expects the worst. A man in the audience asks about Crisp's predictions for 1983. Crisp replies, "Things are going to get worse." Here comes Crisp's big mistake, where he downplays AIDS. He says, "AIDS is a fad, nothing else." Crisp is usually polite and formal in his address. Here in indictment form, Mr. Steele. In the conversation between Crisp and Steele, it emerges that Crisp has made a strategic statement regarding AIDS. He says that the enemies would say that homosexuality and disease go hand in hand. We must treat this crisis as a boring triviality. It will pass. Steele says the number of AIDS victims is increasing. Crisp says he's very sorry to hear that. Steele encourages Crisp to show the reflection that is expressed here both verbally and non-verbally. But here comes something that is distinctive about Crisp. He means what he says and won't retract it. To retract would be to imply that I don't mean what I say. After Crisp's show is stopped by his agent after the statement about AIDS, we see him alone in the apartment. Both image and sound suggest that the loneliness is stark now. The music sounds ominous. He is reading a newspaper article called "The Lonely Life of Quentin Crisp." Crisp feels that humanity is against him. The ominous music continues. It is the first time in the film that we see Crisp sitting alone at the diner. A new person introduces himself at the diner and asks Crisp if he can join him. Crisp says, "Of course." This new person, Mr. Angus, says he loves the way Crisp thinks on the spot, about the questions he is asked. Here we are served Crisp's strategy. I treat it like a geography exam. The night before, you open the atlas at random, and if it says China, you learn everything there is to say about China. That is that Crisp has planned the answer in advance even though the question could be about France, which Mr. Angus suggests. Crisp just redirects the answer to China. You start with, "France is not like China." The scene has changed to Mr. Angus' apartment. Angus shows Crisp some of his paintings. Angus's paintings also have homosexuality as a theme. He explains to Crisp that he is trying to illustrate something I think can be described as closeness, also physical and sexual. But Angus has what seems like sexual intimacy complications for some reason. Crisp has previously been threatened by a man from a group in an alley who has a friend with AIDS. The man says he only refrains from assaulting Crisp because Crisp is old. We see a serious Crisp and a compassionate Steele. Steele says, "You pissed off a lot of people. Are you okay?" Crisp says, "Yes, thank you." We experience Crisp's understanding of those who have it most difficult. Angus paints a portrait of Crisp, and asks him if he minds that he takes advantage of him like this. Crisp replies that he has never understood people who say they feel they have been taken advantage of. Because think of the people who have never been exploited. Life is much harder for them. Later in this conversation, Angus asks if there is a place in heaven for gays. Crisp offers a sarcastic theology. If there is an afterlife for homosexuals, which doesn't seem very likely, It will be very poorly lit and full of people who can feel comfortable never having to meet again. The camera zooms in on a picture in a newspaper where homosexuals are demonstrating in relation to rights and AIDS. In this context, Steele suggests that Crisp issue a statement supporting the protesters. Here comes Crisp's view of civil rights. I don't think anyone has rights. Crisp adds obstinately, almost containedly, if mankind got what it deserved, we would starve. Steele gets enough. He puts the cinema reviews on hold for a while. Angus opens the door for Crisp. Crisp barely looks Angus in the eye but looks down and enters. That's probably just how Crisp does it. What is the cause of this, I wonder? Lack of spark of life or self-esteem? When Crisp finds out that Angus has AIDS, he takes him to a gallery employed in the attempt to get Angus's paintings on display. The gallery employees are very dismissive and condescending. The employee says that works must have a more universal character. Here, universal is shown to be the same as heterosexual. He seems homophobic. Angus leaves the gallery in what seems like shame. When Crisp comes out of the gallery, he is upset. It was his idea. He says, "Please, allow me to help you get them home." But Angus wants Crisp at a distance. He says, "I really need to be myself right now." Crisp is now 10 years older. He sits on a bench with Steele in 90s New York. He talks about retiring. "I think my days as a public speaker are coming to an end." Steele doesn't think Crisp has taken care of himself. He thinks it's good if Crisp starts thinking about himself now. We just heard a voiceover where Crisp notes that his voice is becoming less and less relevant. He also looks very old and tired by now. But now enters a woman named Susanna Ventura, who is called Penny Arcade. She just walked in the front door of Crisp's flat when it was open. It's a funny scene. She says, "Don't worry. I'm here. You're not dead." The front door was open. Penny asks Crisp if he believes in postmodernism. Crisp does not believe that modernism passed into postmodernism. He says, "No. I think there was once modernism, then it ended, now there is only decline and decay." The German social thinker Jürgen Habermas has said something similar. He has criticized postmodernism for being old-fashioned in the political realm and for lacking universality in the moral realm. Penny sounds like she's right in line with Crisp. She says, "I think maybe I just fell in love with you." Penny asks Crisp if he wants to perform with her. Penny says, "You do the words." The camera zooms in on Penny. She says wordlessly, "I do the nudity." Penny and Crisp comes walking. Penny talks about a bar that used to be on the street. Back then it was this seedy gay bar with a great back room. She sounds passionate about it. Penny says that at the bar they wouldn't let the English singer Mark Armand in because of too much makeup. Crisp says that something similar happened to him once in London. Penny calls it queer discrimination. Should homosexuals stick together, one might ask. Discrimination saved Mark Armand's life, says Penny. Again the subject comes up on AIDS. Penny ironically calls the disease fashionable. A small wasp sting for Crisp. The conversation turns to Crisp's relationship with New York. Crisp is happy in the US. Crisp says, "Because happiness rains down from the sky in America." Penny and Crisp talk about how spending money is more American than thinking. Penny talks about American artist and openly gay Andy Warhol, saying that, in the future everyone will have their 15 minutes of fame, but that he should have said, in the future everyone will have 15 minutes to find someone in the room with money. Penny quips later, "Why march for freedom when you can buy really cute white underwear?" There is background music by American R&B singer CeCe Peniston. The music acts as a mental image of Crisp and Penny's meeting, finally. But all he ever wanted was to have a little fun. But now you come and light up my world. Penny says that Crisp is queer more than he is gay. Queer is an umbrella term that covers sexual minorities who define themselves in contrast to heterosexuals. Crisp sees himself as more than gay. Penny asks Crisp to say the first thing that pops into his head. Crisp says he hears from his spies that there is a Democratic president now. It is Bill Clinton who has become president. Steele sits in the audience and claps slowly. Is he worried about Crisp? Later at the diner, Steele expresses concern about Crisp's condition. Crisp won't talk about being tired. We watch a movie inside a movie. It is Crisp who plays the Queen in the 1992 film Orlando. The film is an adaptation of a Virginia Woolf novel. An example of Crisp saying things straight: "When I die, I don't care what happens to me or the world." Steele later tells Crisp's apartment that Crisp's film The Naked Civil Servant really changed his life. That's why Crisp is so important to him. We see a closeness between Crisp and Steele that we haven't seen before, as Crisp has some trouble with a hernia he has. For the first time, Crisp calls Steele by his first name, Philip. Crisp is invited to a speaking tour in the UK. He plans to do so. Penny is upset when she realizes that it is some kind of suicide attempt. Steele later says in Crisp's apartment that Crisp need not die in England. Steele says that Crisp hates England. Crisp hates England, but loves the USA, especially New York. Crisp has been invited to do a final question and answer session. Crisp and Steele go to Tampa, Florida. The background music is the British rock group The Smiths. Crisp is on stage again, sharing his life rules, experiences and trying to support, wait for society to shape itself around you. And Sting's Englishman in New York sounds legendary as background music. Be yourself no matter what they say.